Gary, tell me, where were you born and when, and something about your parents?
Well, it was 1948 in Sydney,
Hmm.
and my parents were both Irish Catholic Australians, about at least four generations in Australia or something like that. I think on both sides, my grandparents' parents came out from Ireland.
Mm.
My mother's maiden name is Kildea, and obviously my father's name is Kildea. So, and I've never yet been to Ireland.
Really?
Shameful,
Well,
isn't it?
it is shameful.
I know. I tried to fit it into this trip, but again, it's not going to do it.
Mm.
Yeah, so grew up in Sydney, Bondi Beach boy, though I never did surf, and
Went to school?
went to school in Catholic school in Sydney,
Mm.
and then
Were there any teachers or any people who influenced you a lot at that point in your life?
not really, not in high school. They're all, good. I mean, I'm naturally growing up in a Catholic school. You get a certain kind of influence and a kind of. I mean, I don't regret it in a way, although I became agnostic myself after. But it was an enjoyable formation. But I did quite well in high school up to a certain point, and then I just got lost in maths, and I never did understand ions in chemistry.
Mm.
Maybe that was partly my fault. Maybe it was teaching, but anyway. And then I sort of got lost in the senior high school, and I did well in sort of history and English and things like that. But maths and science started to drift away, which meant I didn't really matriculate very well, and which meant I didn't go to university at all. But anyway, I didn't want to because I wanted to go straight into the film industry.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Why did you want to go into the film industry so early? What made you?
Oh well, I was making the films even in high school.
Were you?
Yeah, 8mm borrowed cameras and things like that.
What inspired that?
I don't know. I remember doing a holiday job once and then saving up to buy a camera, a little Kodak Instamatic type camera, and then got interested in photography. Then was saved up for a proper camera, a single lens reflex camera. A couple of years later, and just really got into photography, and then I started to read books on filmmaking. Do you remember that it must have been written in the 50s, a book called The Simple Art of Making Films by Tony Rose. It was an English book for amateur I remember poring over that at a local library and things like that, so as a probably 15 or 16. So.
Keep drinking your tea, but so you had your 8mm.
So that's a preschool leaving interest in films and filmmaking. And then I went straight out. Because I didn't get a good matriculation, it gave me a good excuse not to go to university in a sense.
Yeah.
And go straight into film. So I went out of high school at still 16 and into the film industry as a junior in the sound department of it was a general film studio which did everything from feature films, commercials, documentaries. And I started there in the sound department. That was the only job they had going at the time. So a projectionist for mixes and all the boom swinging and recording and the whole sound department thing. And then later I got an opportunity to jump through sound edit because I had a background in sound. A couple of years later I got an opportunity to work as a sound editor on fiction films. So I moved out of the sound recording into the sound editing on features, and then by that step into picture editing. So it was that was there. And then I guess I'm starting at 16, so by the time I'm 20 I'm sort of beginning to be a film editor on commercials and documentaries and things like that. And then I started to get interested in Papua New Guinea.
How was that?
It was because I think it was planted because my father was there during the war. He was in the Air Force. He's actually an electrician working on the building the airstrips in New Guinea, so he's in the Air Force.
So the film you're going to show us about cargo cults somehow go back to your father's building of airstrips.
Yeah, everything's connected to everything else. Well, which is connected to Hitler.
Everything comes from
and yeah.
So anyway, you decided you got interested in PNG and
yeah, so I had that childhood interest because Dad used to show pictures of the war in Papua New Guinea, and I think that really planted a seed of curiosity there about Papua New Guinea. I must say that despite New Guinea being so close to Australia and so bound up with Australia, because as you know, I think around about the turn of the 20th century, Britain gave over the Papua as a colony to Australia when Australia became independent, as it were. And at that stage you had German New Guinea to the north of Papua, and then you had Dutch New Guinea on the west of the island, which is now Indonesia. And of course, since Germany was stripped of her colonies after the First World War, then New Guinea, that is the northern half of the eastern island, became a United Nations mandate to Australia. So you had Papua, territories of Papua and New Guinea, as they were called, because they'd had slightly different status, Papua and New Guinea. Papua was a colony, New Guinea was a mandated territory, but Australia administered them then from, I guess, 1919 or so, through to 1975 in independence as a kind of they had two different statuses, but they're administered as one.
So when did you first go?
I went there in the end of 1970. I think I was 21, almost 22.
As a filmmaker?
Yeah, I got a job there. I happened to know a guy who had worked in that Department of Information film unit, which is an administration. They used to call the colonial government of Papua New Guinea the administration. So the administration had a little informational film unit set up there, half a dozen people. And I knew the guy who I first worked for at this film studio in the sound department in Sydney. He'd gone there to run the place, so I knew about it. So I applied for a job and got a job there as a director cameraman, grade 3 or whatever it was called.
What was the film about?
Oh, it wasn't a film; it was a job.
Oh,
yeah, it was, which is making informational type, propaganda, educational type of films for the administration, mainly set up for internal filmmaking. Although we also supplied material to externally to people who needed information films. But then I got a chance to get away from the mere propaganda or educational type films and started to make a kind of ethnographic film. The first one was one that was called the Buglayungu, the Great Chimbu Pig Festival, which I went up by myself with just a little Canon Scoopik, the 100-foot load, not sound camera, of course, but 16mm 100-foot load, 3 minutes, and a separate Nagra to record separate sound. But that, of course, were films were mainly made in those days. It was just the cusp of the kind of revolution of sync sound cameras like Aries and Eclairs coming in. In fact, we did have an Eclair at the film unit, but I went away to the Chimbu, that's in the Highlands. I think it was Christmas '71. To more or less, I was just expected to come back with some tourist type footage of this. It's a 7-year feast, a pig feast that was going on. But anyway, I ended up with my little 100-foot loads, making a film about that. And I hadn't much idea of what anthropology or ethnographic film was then, but that was what I was doing, unbeknownst to me. But I did consult written anthropologies after the event.
Brown.
Paula Brown, partly, but also German priest, anthropologist, his name I forget, not Nilus was one, but there was another German priest, and others. Paula Brown had been in that area. I did, And in fact I got to know her a bit later because of that. But other anthropologists, Australian anthropologists who were in Port Moresby at the time, I sort of asked them to look over the film at various stages. So that's when I started fellow travelling with anthropology back in 1971, 72.
Yeah.
And been doing it on and off ever since. So I've been getting my own anthropology degree without ever having enrolled.
Then you made a couple more films, didn't you, before Chobrand and Cricket?
Yeah, there was one called, there's several, apart from the informational type ones, there's another one called Concerning the Lives of the People, or in Pidgin was Blong Loon Blong All was a Pidgin title, because that was a quote from one of the characters. But that was my first foray into, as it were, cinema verite type filming with the sync sound camera, with the idea of subtitling. Which, you know, that between that first the Pig Festival film and this one was from my own sort of straddling of the old and the new, the old world of where most documentaries were shot without sync sound and music effects, narration, etc. added later, and the idea of a sort of partly observational film. It wasn't entirely an observational film. It was consisted of about, I think, 5 little chapters, 5 10-minute sections about different parts of the country, which was the idea of the film was to show the general, give a general idea of the country around about the time of self-government, which was a predecessor of independence. So I think self-government, the first step came in 1973, and true independence came in 75. The first step. So around this self-government time, I went around more by myself, determining where I would go myself. That was quite a lot of freedom, making the film in the style that I determined myself, which was this new idea of filming sync sound with the idea of it later being subtitled, which was pretty new, and I'd only
We tell our students it was David McDougall, Living with Herbs.
Yes, that's true, and I'd never seen David or Judith's film, and I'd never met them at that stage, but I'd heard of it. I'd heard tell, when I was visiting Sydney for one of the Sydney Film Festivals once, I heard tell of that somebody just mentioned it. In fact, I think they were making reference to my first, the Buglayungu, the Pig Festival film, saying what a pity it wasn't done, in that new style where people can speak. And I thought to myself, oh, little do they know that there's no way I could have done that. Maybe I've done a good job of sound editing. That was my first profession, because maybe it looked like the film was shot sync sound, but all the effects were laid in. Even some sort of speaking would look like it was sort of laid in, like it wasn't sort of subtitled, of course, or anything, but some ritual shouting, and that was sort of carefully sound edited. So maybe it looked like I had the opportunity to do it that way, but of course I didn't. But anyway, as soon as I heard that, it's like a light went on. There's a complete epiphany. I said, of course, you do. That's how you. Because I'd been a film freak, even though I wasn't enrolled at Sydney University, I was a member of the Sydney University Film Group, and I loved the first observational documentaries like Maisley's Brothers, like Salesman and things like that. I was really blown away by that. Plus, I was blown away by European, art cinema with its subtitles. But putting those two things together, I hadn't thought of putting them together until I heard about what the McDougalls were doing. And as soon as I heard it, suddenly I said, "That's it." So then I went experimented in this film called "Concerning the Lives of the People." Yeah. So that and I was from then I was never going to look back. As far as commentary and that is concerned. But then, ironically, around about that point, Jerry contacted me, Jerry Leach, yes. The anthropologist who had been working in the Trobrians, and asked me would I like to work on the film which later became Trobrian Cricket. And but Trobrian Cricket was never sort of suggested that film could have been made in the observational style. So I was, in a sense, taking a step backward in film style. So I thought, oh yes, this would definitely require a commentary. and as far as I knew, it would require all kinds of sort of strictures imposed by anthropology, because it was Jerry's project in a way. He'd started it, and he was asking me to help him on it. So I thought, I'll be constrained and restricted in all kinds of ways. I naively thought that anthropology must have cinema, down pat by then, what to do with it and how to use it, and that they'd have all kinds of rules and regulations, and that I would be making for the first time a really sort of scientific film. But to this day, I'm yet to see one, actually. A truly scientific film, because now I think I understand that that's on a hiding to nothing to try to do such things.
But, our students are interested. They asked the other day about what proportion of the film was set up.
Which one, Trevor and Cricket?
Well,
Jerry says. I know it's in Annette Weiner's review. She complains that it was sort of in a sense a kind of reconstruction. But Jerry complains that. But I said, because Jerry wrote the commentary, said several times in the film it's explained that it's a reconstruction of He says these things. He talks about people arranging things for the film in the commentary. So it's in a sense a demonstration match. But that was we never thought. Well, I never imagined that it would that we were trying to hide anything with that. Neither did Jerry. It was mentioned, but it's like for. But for all intents and purposes, if you say you wanted to put on a cricket match for Americans, say in America, for example, and you got an Australian team, for example, and an English team there to play for them. Well, obviously, it would be a demonstration match. But for all intents and purposes, what they need to know about cricket is it's not affected one way or the other. The fact that it's a demonstration match, you want to see how it works. So yeah, that particular match was a kind of demonstration.
Do you have any criticisms of how it was done now, looking back on it, or apart from that it was a backward step for you in a sort of way?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's a backward step. It's on that trajectory towards what I would thought was the ideal kind of cinema. Well, it was a forward step in the sense that it was working with an anthropologist and working with Jerry. That was very much a progress for me too, because it introduced me more intimately with the whole notion of anthropology, and it brought me here to Cambridge 30 years ago to work with Jerry on the editing, and that's great. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that's all progress. But it was a backward step in terms of the unfettered filmmaking, which was towards where I was heading towards, like Celso and Cora, which was another film down the track. Which yeah.
We got to the point making a Trevor and Cricket, and
yes.
after that, what happened then? Unless there's anything else you'd like to say about Trevor and Cricket and working with anthropologists.
Well, as I said, that one of the great things, was to come here at Cambridge and spend. I guess it was the best part of a year here, one way and another.
Gosh. Surprising we didn't meet, or perhaps we did.
Yeah, we must have passed. Yeah.
What year was this about?
Well, it was actually 75.
Yeah, it was my first year around.
Yeah.
Bit obsessed.
Yeah. I think I remember going to some of the seminars and that.
It was Jack
Goody was in charge.
Did you get to know Jack at all?
Just a nodding acquaintance. I don't think he'd remember.
Or any of the other anthropologists at that time?
Yes, Stephen.
Hugh Jones.
Yes, Stephen Hugh Jones, and Paul Silito was here at the time.
Yes.
And others I remember quite well, but the names escape me at the moment. What's the one whose son is now an anthropologist here? Gilbert Lewis. Yes. I remember Gilbert quite well.
Yes.
And I met his son at LSE last year when I came to show Corum.
Yes.
So I guess, I don't know.
Did you, I mean, your feelings, just is perhaps a point to mention, I mean, because you come in through the film side rather than through the anthropology side, have you lost all apprehension and anxiety about anthropologists, or you just look at them?
No. I mean, an anthropologist is just someone who takes that road professionally, but also, I suppose, signs up to that institution. I feel, but everyone has the potential for an anthropological imagination, and you don't have to be a full member in order to benefit from that, or to learn from it, or to take on the ethos and the logos of anthropology, which I think I've done. And I love that. I think anthropology is a wonderful philosophy, kind of philosophy. But I'm first and foremost a filmmaker, and that's when my I suppose loyalties to a discipline lie. And we may as well call it a discipline, at least the kind of filmmaking I'm interested in, because it's it requires. I do think that the best in filmmaking has more in common with the best in anthropology than with the less good stuff in either kind. More I think about, people say, oh, visual anthropology, that's a nonsense because you can't make an argument in a movie with assembling mere surfaces.
Yes.
And I mean, I'd be quite happy in a debate to run that argument as much as the other side. I mean, it is an interesting debate, and it's a very interesting philosophical debate. But it should be the debate needs to be taken on board seriously, and it goes to some of the most profound epistemological issues and notions. And the debate well run would be an extremely interesting one, I think, for philosophers to take on. I keep hoping that to interest professional philosophers in doing it, because much of the debate is run at a very superficial level, where you have epistemological concerns totally mixed up and obscured by institutional concerns, including kind of stupid notions of membership and card carrying and fee paying, and so the issues get very clouded when even without the clouds, it's difficult to think through issue.
How do you, I mean, there are stupid people, but the basic issue, which is that the relationship between the sign and the signified in film is so close that abstraction is difficult, and much more difficult than in language, and as a result it's much more powerful emotionally, but intellectually it's very difficult to deal with abstractions in film. Yeah,
but tell that to Harold Pinter. That's the thing. I mean, it's abstractions must be come to in a different way. I mean, a novelist will handle it differently to a playwright.
This is why Dr. Johnson said of Shakespeare, you should read Shakespeare, you shouldn't watch Shakespeare's plays.
Some people even say you should read scores, not listen to a mere performance, because a mere performance is going to have errors.
Yes.
So when the purest Mozart scholars would sit there and get carried away by the mere black notes. I think you can say that an argument can't be made in film, but let's remove the word argument and replace it with synthesis. Then that's when I say that the best of film and the best of monograph is beautiful because the synthesis is beautiful, because it takes us somewhere complexly yet simply, with depth and elegance. These are the real. These are the substantive things, and where I think if visual anthropology has a future, it has to understand that if anthropology is after all these years, is ever going to really assimilate cinema. It has to understand that you cannot expect to make it. Jay Ruby, for example, still holds out the hope that somehow, somewhere, though he can't really point to it exactly, there's going to be a truly ethnographic cinema. And I admire Jay in the sense that he's pushing for a rigor. He wants some rigor brought to the whole debate. But like all of us, it's easier to impose rigor on other people's utterances than it is on our own. And I think Jay's sort of analyses need some rigor applied to them. And to me, I'm far from a scholar and even further from being a philosopher, but my amateur excursions into reading bits and pieces of philosophy make me think that we keep trying to reinvent the wheel, and Immanuel Kant has told us that is laid out for us, amongst many others, no doubt, that in the Critique of Reason and in his breaking up of epistemological, I would say, different species of knowingness. And I don't think it's a mere matter of drawing borders amongst disciplines and things. I think that there are fundamentally different ways of perception and knowledge making in our mind. And I suspect, and that's why I say I keep wishing I could interest true philosophers in this problem, that when Kant talks about reflective judgments and determinate judgments, or reflective propositions and determinate propositions, I think that's where this fundamental difference lies. And determinate judgments pointing to a rule. They're using instances as merely something to support an argument for proposing a rule. A reflective judgment or a reflective proposition is giving us something to reflect upon. So, not putting too fine a point on it, but so I think this, for want of some other going back to first principles analysis, that's where I think the first principle is. We must build from there. This is not to say that you have to be a fancy philosopher. I think any human, when we walk around the street, if this distinction is true, then it operates. We can't walk in a room without making a sort of we make reality out of a kind of a combination overlaying of different ways of seeing. And so I like to think, like, if I was to wake up, if you were to drug me and bring me into this room, and leave, and I wake up and I just need to get out of here, how do I can perceive aspects of this room, and in its concreteness, but I only know that that's a door because I apply a rule, because I know doors often have that shape and have those particular things attached to them, locks and things. So it's but there's nothing to say that that's a door other than a sort of pre-existing rule about rooms, and I must superimpose my perception of this space. So that's what I mean by you don't have. It's not as if. And these distinctions operate in all. It's not. We weren't designed to be intellectuals. We were designed to walk around and reproduce and to feed the body and to get hungry and everything. So that anyway. So that's why I think it's that kind of philosophical question which I think is fascinating about the debate about ethnographic film. Or is visual anthropology a contradiction in terms? I think that could be well argued. But then where therefore should visual anthropology go? And I think the first thing is that you can't make good visual ethnographic film, let's say. You can't make good ethnographic film unless you take into account that difference. And who was that? Walter Pater, and has written interesting, way back 100. Again, we don't have to do new. We just have to read what's already been written. And he talks about one of his dictums is that all art aspires to the condition of music, which is a very nice idea. And I think what he means by that is music uses up all its material in its effect. There's nothing left over. And I think that's a very nice thing to keep in mind with film too, but that's a whole other rave. But Pater also talks about that any form, any expressive form, really ought to do well what it can do best. In other words, to discern what its strength is and to go with it, push at its own strengths. And the strength of cinema is its, let's just say, its eventfulness. That what we have is a representation of an event. I would say more than being visual, I would call it eventful, because visual is only part of it. It's visual, but it's temporal, and it's oral. So if we put those three things together, we have an event. And you said before about how when the sign and the signifier are sort of very close, embedded, like that, like Bill Nichols and others talk about the sundial as opposed to the digital watch. So when the sundial tells the time in direct reference, is it sort of a signifier? Yes, iconic. So, and Bill Nichols also says that famous little phrase which David often quotes, that the problem with visual anthropology is how do you, in a work which is concentrating what to do with people when your work, your ethnographic film, is concentrating beyond them to some abstraction. The people, that is what I would say the events, get in the way. And if that's how it is, if you think that the eventfulness of cinema is getting in the way of your abstraction, then you have problems. Then you're not taking William Pater's advice. Then you'll never reach. You've got too much lead in your saddlebags. You're never going to get anywhere. So until and unless visual anthropology understands this, in other words, they become filmmakers informed by anthropology, but filmmakers who understand that they must go with the event and have it lead to abstractions, like Harold Pinter. It is a play. I had a screening of Corum, the new film at the University of Kent, and it was mainly well received. But Bill Watson was there, Professor Bill Watson, and he raised an objection. Oh, really? Oh, there you go. And I really appreciated what he said, and because it really lifted the debate to that higher level where it belongs, because he said that in Corum's law about the so-called cargo cult, he said that after there's been general approval of the film amongst the gathered students and teachers, but then Bill sort of raised an objection. He said, just as the whites in the film, the white people are seen by the Papua New Guinea, that Pomio, to be withholding secrets. Therefore, the Pomio people are a bit frustrated with white people for withholding the secret of their success and everything. He said, so does the film withhold its secrets from us, the audience. And it was quite a nice way to put it. In other words, he's saying Bill was getting frustrated by the fact that the film refused to explain where it could have explained. It held back its explanation, and I think he thought that was quite perverse. and wanted and he had a point in the sense that, okay, this is seen as an ethnographic film. It's being shown in the context of a university, an anthropology department. Yet it pointedly refuses to accept the explanatory responsibility. It takes an other than the explanatory attitude. And I said, yes, you're quite right. I mean, if that's and therefore, precisely because of that, I would not claim, certainly make no claims for it being or constituting anthropology. Apart from anything else, apart from those things which he pointed out, it's simply not systematic. The film is not systematic. It's, as I think, an ethnography taking proper explanatory responsibility should do. Even if you've got gaps in the information of the argument, you should explain that there are gaps and things like that. And then I said to him, but you're much better off reading the film like it was a play, and not reading it like it was an ethnography, and because you're reading it against the grain. And if, however, therefore you determine that it should not, must not carry any sort of claims to being ethnography, well, I would agree with that. But others wouldn't. I mean, I would agree, and probably I had more in common with Bill, and probably with J. Ruby, than many others would. Because I still, I guess, carry this notion that I mentioned before when I first imagined what it would be like to work with an anthropologist. I still have this notion of social science being quite strict and having a very set out methodology to avoid scientific error and things like that. Being determined to have determinate judgments and keep away from mere reflective judgments. So, but other people in anthropology throughout, that I meet all over the world, as I'm still fellow travelling with them, they actually don't feel that at all. They feel that anthropology should and must be much broader than that, and must be first and foremost a humane philosophy and an engaged philosophy. And to hell with science. It should be more like an art, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, an argument for anthropology and anthropologists. I have nothing to say on it, because I'm not. I don't pay dues even still. 30 years on here in Cambridge, I still don't pay dues to anthropology. I just, but I enjoy it. I enjoy associating with it, and of course, this film, the latest film, Corum's Law, is in a sense about anthropology. But I sort of insist that Andrew is the anthropologist in the film.
Is it Andrew Stefan?
No, Andrew Lattas is his name. Yeah, I keep insisting that I figured Andrew as a character alongside Peter, the main informant, and not as a mediator. And I think everyone can make their own judgment about that. But in my own mind, that I figure Andrew thus is crucial to the way the film works and to the intention of the film. It puts, and what I've tried to do is put Andrew and Peter and the other people on all of them they hold the moral center together, the moral and intellectual center of the film. That's what I'm hoping for, how I've tried to arrange the thing. And therefore try and slip out of the postmodern angst we might have about knowing the other, or whose story is it, and also therefore thereby I would like to insist that the film is more is a universal. It's like a playwright might seize upon that subject. Anthropology becomes as much a character in the film as although I must admit I've tried to have my cake and eat it too. But that's why the first very shot is a close-up of a Papua New Guinean man from Pomia there. His name is Paul. He's tight close-up of him drinking a coconut. Nothing said, quiet. And the second shot is a close profile of Andrew, the Lattas, the anthropologist. Again, nothing said, in an indeterminate relationship with the first shot. And then after some pause, and it's back to the shot of Paul, who's now finished his drinking his coconut, and starts to talk, and he, in a few sentences, he gives what I think is the rationale for the whole movement, this Pomyo Kivung movement, in a few sentences, and it's about. He says briefly, if you go into the cemetery, you'll see there's a cross there, but that was for my dead brother. But other people told me, why did you put a cross there? Because Jesus, yes, he died on that cross, but Jesus is not one of us. And Jesus, yeah, it's true that Jesus died on the cross, but whatever he did when he arose from the dead, he gave the secret of development to the white people, and for the white people's place, but not to us. And that, I think, is I'm lucky to have that, very lucky to find that as a sort of a pre-title sequence, which in a couple of sentences sets out the whole rationale. But anyway, getting back to the first two shots, it's Paul, close-up, silence, coconut, Andrew, profile, silence, close-up. To me, I'm consciously trying to flag right from the get-go that this is about race. It's about black and white and the history, first and foremost, and then Paul gives the sort of the cognitive, as it were, rationale for the movement. But even before that, I'm flagging my sort of. But if that's an expressive element, if that's an episteme of some kind, then it's one of it's kind of a mise en scène that a playwright might use. It's a reflective judgment. It's a reflective statement. It's offering something up for reflection. And at that level, the film goes on. At the same time, it's got heaps of other things going. It also contains ethnography, but it doesn't constitute ethnography, I don't think. But the film is suffused, is informed by the philosophy of anthropology, and that's why there is nothing else. Where else are we to look in our Western knowledge or in human knowledge? Where else can we find the simple truth that, after all, different cultures are equivalent? They're all trying to solve the same problems of the human organism, and which, luckily, at the very end of the film, Peter himself expresses very nicely, which you'll see there. Where he comes up, draws out of his head, as Peter the main informant, he says, Andrew's asking him, was he afraid of what he's spoken to us? Was he afraid of letting out so many secrets? And Peter says, no, he said, it's my culture, but I want to give it to you. He said, the white people, I trust white people not to make fun of us, because I know that they know that their lifestyle has come about through the development of their history and their culture, just as ours is. He said, but whatever the culture, the story is the same. So this is what Peter himself. So even Peter feeds back. We know we don't even need to resort to Western philosophy. Peter himself brings out of his own philosophy the equivalence of the cultures. But anyway, for us, anthropology is it is a humane art stroke science. It has its colonial aspect, and it has its sort of aspect of this Western problem of feeling superior and looking down and examining everyone else. But the flip side is actually where else are we to look for a sort of to sustain a humane approach which comes not out of mere ideology but comes out of a kind of scientific approach. Science, good science, leading to good ideology, which is equality. And race equality is the yearning for equality that is a theme of the film, which Andrew very nicely, out of his anthropological philosophy and science, brings out. Andrew says that directly to us in the film, that the people are striving to regain a status of equality with these strange white beings who come out of nowhere. They're not dreamed of in the local cosmology, and that the whole idea of this Pomyo Kivung, so-called cargo cult, is this striving to regain equanimity, regain equilibrium, regain place in the world, which before white people came into the picture, the relationship of the earth, local gods, ancestors, the universe was well understood, and the very existence of white people, let alone their colonial sort of hegemonies, and the very existence was enough to sort of upset the apple cart of cosmology. And the whole idea of the Pomyo Kivung movement is to set the apple cart right again. Or as I like the otherwise metaphor that comes to my mind is, I think it's like it's cosmology repair, like a wound, it's like scar tissue where a wound is sort of the body rushes to a wound to seal it and fix it soon, and then grows a kind of like a skin, but it's distorted though it may be, it's more or less functional. And that's how I see the Pomyo Kivung and Kivung. And I'm so grateful to Andrew and to anthropology and to the opportunity with the fellow filmmaker actually who got the whole project started, Andrea. I'm very grateful to however it came about that I had a chance over several years to work through that process, because it was a fantastic education, transformative experience. And I don't think about human ideation in the same way as I did before I started this. The whole idea of ideas, cosmological ideas, but cosmological ideas that a culture has, much like the ideas that an individual has. It's not we don't call it cosmology. We generally draw our cosmology from our culture, but in the same way, we all create a reality, an idea world. We swim, we live in ideas in every bit as much as we go about in a sea of air, and oxygen and nitrogen. We are in a sea, a world of ideas, and we can't live for a moment without them. And that leads to all our problems, as well as but presumably we can't. Presumably it leads to our prospects too.